Hey, so I'm going to be talking about page parts, which is a project I kind of quickly put together in the aftermath of AtmosphereConf, mostly in collaboration with the Semble team. And so I did a quick demo about it then, and then kind of let it lie for a little bit. And this talk was sort of my motivation to bring it back to the forefront of my mind. So hopefully I can get more into it into the coming weeks. My main motivation for this project was thinking about how can we create more activation sites for developer energy. And so one of the features that I think was always super interesting about Blue Sky was this whole feeds primitive. There was something in the UI of this app that a developer anywhere in the world could create a separate service that is running on a separate server that is orchestrating the user experience in this app. And I think that that kind of idea in primitive was really, really exciting, and that we have these things in atproto that let us do this. Just for a high level thing, I'll probably get a little jargony in parts of this talk. It's kind of getting into the weeds of some of the nicher atproto things. I'll do my best to explain that, but we can stop for questions or do it at the end, whatever feels comfortable. So XRPC services are a thing that you can define in a lexicon, like you define a record type. And you can say, this service lives on wherever in the world, and it takes this data and returns this data. And that's how a feed generator works. It takes mostly just the identity of the person requesting it and a little cursor, and then it gives you back a list of posts that'll then get rendered in the Blue Sky or Black Sky UI. I think that that's a primitive that is a little underutilized, and we can do a lot of really interesting things with it. Namely, you can create interfaces that maybe make more of the atmosphere legible to more users. So I think a lot of the things we're building right now look like apps, right? You go to a website, you sign in, your data is there. That's pretty cool that your data is already there. But from a user interface perspective, it looks like an application. I think for this whole network to exist or to succeed, we really need to discover interface primitives that let us make visible that it is a network. A feed is one such primitive, and I was really curious what maybe some others could be. And finally, I was interested in trying to figure out how we could make long-form documents a distribution channel for Atmosphere apps or Atmosphere experiences. If people are writing about stuff, can we enable them to write about more stuff, or to be able to embed or link, et cetera, all these things across the atmosphere. And so what page parts is a set of lexicons for mentioning, so this like @mention UI, and embedding things across the atmosphere. And buried within there is a sort of like half-assed app embed spec that sort of fell out of it, but is really not fleshed out. So we can look at, let me just zoom in here. The set of lexicons, this is lexicon.garden, which is a pretty useful lexicon tool. But we have 5 lexicons that define a bunch of different things. There's a search service, which cannot be found. Let's do this manually. Okay, well, I guess I didn't publish this properly, so we will do it off the cuff. Poke around, see if I can find them anywhere. Yeah, that's something. There's also, yeah, but I'm looking for the other one. I'll just talk about them. So we basically have one service that defines the input output for the actually searching for mentions. This is the thing that anyone can publish. It's equivalent to like the feed generator service. It's a mention search service. And so if you run an app view that is indexing a bunch of stuff in the atmosphere and you want to expose a way for people to search it and to mention those objects, you stand up a mention service. So the Semble team stood one up for searching your cards and your collections. You could have one in the distance for searching up your runs and your routes or anything like that. It's just returning basically a set of references to those objects and a bunch of metadata for how we should present that to the user. So like a href for where this lives on the web, or a name for how we should represent it. Then there's okay, I guess this one works. A lexicon for actually publishing that. So you can say, hey, I advertised that I made this mention search service for this set of lexicons. This exists. Anyone can discover this and resolve this. And then as a user, you can add your set of search services. You can say, hey, I'm a user of the distance. I'm a user of Semble. These are the search services I want to be able to use. And then any application like Leaflet can resolve those and start making those accessible for the user. So the way this actually looks in practice is I can go in here, I can type @ and these are all my search services. So I can search identities, I can search publications, I can search my grain, which is like an Instagram type thing. I can search my Semble cards, and I can search my Semble collections. So if I go in here, I go in like, hello. It'll take a second because it's bouncing around, but this is a whole bunch of different Semble cards that are just in the Semble universe. I can also search for Semble collections, like atproto. I can get a whole bunch of those, and then I can scope down and start searching Semble cards. Search services can basically advertise a bunch of scopes for different ways you can search them, and search results can advertise scopes that then can be scoped down into. And so this is the thing that I'm sort of trying to gesture towards here is like, this is an interface that is open-ended in that there's one mention service, one mention UI that I'm implementing inside Leaflet, but it then gives you access to all these different things across the atmosphere that different people can implement and can fit into this one thing. Be like half-assed, let's see if it still works if the Semble team kept it up, but the collection service here, so it defaults to mine. There's this like embed button where they published a iframe basically that can be advertised by the search service and then embedded into whatever document is dealing with this. This was super janky, a super kind of hacky way to approximate application interfaces. And we actually did define a small RPC protocol between the host and the iframe. I didn't quite figure out how to communicate that protocol in lexicons, which is kind of like an open problem that is very interesting. But yeah, no, it didn't work. But the thing we were prototyping is basically being able to have this in here and then open up to the right of it another sub page that is a view of the whole collection. And so you can imagine us defining a thing that lets us orchestrate these interfaces and app experiences across this whole thing. Yeah, that's kind of the general picture of what it is. Maybe I'll stop there if there's any questions. Okay. No, that's something I've created. XRPC is just the atproto word for RPC requests. It's just the type of thing for external RPC requests. Yeah, so the question was, why are the embeds, like this specific collection iframe thing, if I'm understanding it correctly, a hosted service instead of a record that's published somewhere? And the main reason was that that's kind of the grain of the web platform. Like if you are trying to render untrusted content, you are going to end up putting it in an iframe and putting it on an external domain anyway. That's kind of the only way to safely do that. And so if you are trying to resolve like a WASM blob and then put that into something, you end up having to create a separate hosted service somewhere. And the theory was, for this prototype at least, that we can approximate that whole thing by just assuming we're embedding it in an iframe from the start. So in this UI, so the question was, do we make requests to all the services when we're searching? And in this particular UI, no, because we can scope down to a specific search service first. You could imagine a UI where that wasn't true. I don't know. The question was, can we use something like this to be able to embed interfaces that maybe the user already trusts to have actions on your website instead of having them to take those actions on your random website? And the answer is sort of. The web really doesn't want you to be able to have cross-site tracking. And so there's a specific browser API that you can use to give specific domains the ability to share auth data when they are in iframes. And as I understand it, the user only needs to do that once per domain, maybe once per domain pair. And so you can have kind of like a login button. And if they hit the login button, instead of redirecting them to OAuth, it'll give them a browser pop-up that's like, hey, do you want to share auth state to this iframe? And then when they click that, then they will have their Semble auth state turn up in that iframe. It's less than ideal, but we did experiment with it, and I think there are some interesting opportunities there. Yeah, but potentially if you get enough places adopting this kind of thing, it could be a pleasant user experience. Unsure. Any further questions on what this is? Okay, we'll get to that at the end because I have a little bit left on. Okay. For what? Is there a reason Leaflet doesn't use XRPC for what? For? Yeah, we had an API system that predates doing that kind of stuff, and we don't want to have a stable API service for most of the things we're doing, so we don't want to commit to that contract. Let's go back to this one. So, whole bunch of open questions on this whole thing. The biggest one is, from a user perspective, how do we actually distribute these things? It's you don't really want to be like adding a whole bunch of mention services. That's not a thing you have an idea of your head. What's this is about? You can imagine an app store for this, where you add the like running set of services, set of mention stuff to your account, and then you can do that. You can imagine, I just think this idea is neat, like having every blog post have a colophon, which is basically like, these are the tools I use to write it. And that could be, you know, like Leaflet, Offprint, but also like the Semble mention service and the Semble embed service and these kinds of things. And then when you're reading blog posts, you could be like, ooh, I like that service and I'm going to steal it and use it. You could also imagine just through long form posts having like little add this service button so that people can just write up when they create these things and add them. Huge open question, how should embeds actually work? The iframe thing that we have in there is a very primitive attempt at this, and we could do something much more robust. Yeah, that's a whole can of worms. Through doing this, I'm pretty confident that iframes are a good version of this, but there's lots and lots of trade-offs there. And then you can also imagine more parts that we add. Mention services and embeds are one, but you could imagine adding slash commands that add an interface for being able to author different types of blocks instead of just search for them. You could imagine, similar to the Blento thing, having parts that you can add to your homepage that are different kind of things that index into different atproto content in different ways. Other UI elements, maybe. So I want to move this thing forward. So if you have any ideas about these open questions, if you have thoughts on embeds, thoughts on an app store for this, thoughts on distribution models, please let me know. If you have an editing context, which means like even just a profile field or any place where users are writing stuff on the atmosphere, you could try implementing page.parts so that they can mention and link to and potentially embed all the stuff that they're doing elsewhere. And if you have a service that has a bunch of content in the atmosphere, you could try creating a mention service. You could try creating a way for people to search and then mention the objects in your app view. Yeah, that's all I got. Open-ended questions? Yeah.
What sort of data is available? Like, is there anything on protocol now? Like, what services? Are there reference sample data services?
Yes. So the question is, what services exist right now on atproto?
Even just like sample data, just records.
Well, so there is. Yeah. So there are, I think, like 4 maybe that exist. There's a symbol one, a grain one, what's the music one? Nate's thing. Player.fm has one. Oh yeah, I had like a demo one for Wikipedia that was kind of cool, just to be able to mention those things. Those exist. I think the latter two, the grain one and the player.fm one, are open source. I don't know if Semble's shipped theirs yet, but there are some reference points. Yeah, you can. It's just a service that can index whatever you want and then return a list of URIs. Those URIs could be atproto content. They could be web URIs. I think it fits really nicely into the atmosphere, but it is just a way to talk about stuff on the internet and to create interfaces that index stuff on the internet. Yeah.
Any like leading theories on how you plan to implement embeds? I didn't realize you guys even do like any URI. It's a little bit different. But we've been thinking about like lexicon embeds.
I think the biggest thing I have an opinion on is that the question was any theories or ideas on how we're going to implement embeds. The thing I have the strongest opinion on that is not super strong is that if you're going to do open-ended stuff where you're trying to do this generically for arbitrary embeds that other people are going to implement, that iframes most likely are the way that makes sense and are the most flexible way. And the safest and just the easiest surface to implement. I did a whole bunch of research on like the other ways people are doing this, like the way Reddit does and the way Farcaster Frame did. And I think you sort of have 2 choices between like implementing your own UI model and your own UI capability system, and then working really hard to make sure that that's safe to implement and doesn't expose any extra capabilities, et cetera, or put things in an iframe and give that a RPC surface if you want to do kind of like broader interactions. And the latter is a much more accessible model for people developing against these things who are making these little embedded interfaces. And also just easier to implement if you're trying to implement the same thing across a whole bunch of things. If we want to have Leaflet to be able to do embeds and Black Sky to be able to do embeds, and those to be the same embeds, I think, yeah, my current opinion would be iframes are the way to go and the most sort of future-proof. If we end up doing web tiles or any of these other stuff, we can pretty easily retcon that on top of iframes since they require it anyway. That's crazy. The question was, have I ever used or looked at Google Wave? I have not used it. It was before my time and short-lived, but I have looked at it a lot, and I think a lot of the like weird user interfaces for collaborative stuff. Yeah. Sure. So as I understand it, the question was, can I expand on web tiles? Web tiles are a specification for describing these blocks of interface and code and the capabilities that they request from their kind of like embedding environment. And I think they can kind of be maybe implemented specifically as Blossom blobs, maybe implemented in a diversity of ways, I'm not sure. But an environment that is actually embedding web tiles, I think ends up doing putting them in iframes anyway on different domains, because that's the safest, easiest way to kind of like render or to run untrusted code on the web. And so the point I was making earlier of like we could implement web tiles on top of a embedding record service that just assumed you were going to be putting these in iframes was that we could then just put the URIs of the services that are implementing web tiles into this service instead. Right. Yes. Yes, which works. So when I kind of went down the OEmbed rabbit hole, it was sort of solving a different problem, which is like, given a URI on the web, how do you discover how you want to embed this thing? And it sort of morphed over the years into a very different kind of thing there, which is like, given a whitelist of URIs, how do you deal with how you want to embed these things? And it kind of gave up on the open-endedness version of it, where you are discovering any URL and then any version of how to embed that. So definitely adjacent, but I didn't kind of see a lot that could be drawn directly from there. I don't know how we're doing on time, or if we, yeah. Okay. So the two questions were, one, what's the incentive for someone to stand up a mention service? The answer there is yeah, distribution. You can turn up in wherever is implementing this, which as an answer here. Second question is sort of just leaflet and barely leaflet as it stands. Like, so to get access to this UI, if anyone is trying to do this, if you publish a configuration record, like parts.page.config.mention.config in your PDS, you will then, the little app mention UI will turn up when you use leaflet. So if you're testing this out, do that. It is intentionally hard. I'm not trying to ship this right now. This is very much a prototype and very much half works, but it's there if you are trying to test this thing out. Yeah, I think I would love for other things to implement this. I think there's some open questions. I don't know. I can't think of any other examples, but I think there's got to be other people this stuff of like people can just publish records into their thing. Yeah, so I think the question is, does this relate to a concept I hadn't heard of, which was Fresnel lens in the semantic web world, but it sounds kind of similar to different ways of attaching interfaces to particular data. So if you know that this is a location data, you can look up the way to represent it. I think it's sort of like at a higher level to that, where if we can define the boundaries of the embedding context and the way we find these things and resolve these things, we can actually leave the how we actually represent these things totally up to the specific services and the specific applications that are dealing with it. And we don't have to have a new sort of canonical representation of like how this thing is rendered, et cetera. This whole thing is much looser. It's much more loosely coupled than I think something like that.
Like, for example, if content is labeled, like, whose responsibility is it for like what we use to show piece of content?
I think it kind of exists on two levels, right? Like there's, for the thing you're embedding, you usually have a URI associated with it. And so the page is responsible for moderating that URI to be like, should we be embedding this object at all? And then within that, you're kind of seceding control, where like within that frame, they can be rendering whatever they want for whatever content anywhere. And so that becomes sort of like a secondary moderation service or surface. I think that part of the reason I think this makes a lot of sense in the document context is that authors are explicitly authoring these documents, right? They're not assembling them from user-generated feeds or anything like that. They are specifically like typing things out to include things. And so you have a pretty high signal of intent that they want something to be here, which I think changes the moderation dynamics a lot. And I think if you were rendering a feed of embedded surfaces, that's a very different context. I think that those kinds of systems are really cool, and that's kind of like a lot of what WebTiles wants to accomplish, I think, and other services to that extent. My goal with something like this is to get out of the way of stuff like that. I think that that's a problem you can solve separately, and I just wanted to enable these kinds of like slots that we could put different stuff into. And in the future, if we can get WebTiles to a point where people are creating and distributing embedded applications through that, then you should be able to slot those right in. And then you get the additional benefits of your things don't go away. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, guys.